As we continue our discussion on voting rights barriers in California today, we're joined by Ted Jackson, the Community Organizing Director for the California Foundation for Independent Living. We're going to be talking a little bit about barriers to disability accessibility in California and how it impacts the right to vote. Ted, how are you addressing all of these issues?
Well, I think the first thing that you have to realize about accessible voting is that you're talking about a large population that may come to voting in many different avenues and different ways, because the people are as diverse as the disabilities are diverse. So really it's about having a process that's baked in. It's like a cake recipe. And it really isn't a conversation completely about voter accessibility for people with disabilities, but it's like language access that you were talking about with Michelle. It's in all these other different components that you have to have alternate formats, you have to have alternate options for people to be able to request accommodations, because people with disabilities are going to be very different, but they also might only be Spanish speaking or Chinese speaking or English speaking. They come from a wide variety of different neighborhoods, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And so really it's about having that process baked into all of your processes. And I think with accessible voting, it's not even like the 3-layer cake. It is a 7-layer cake, flourless, with a special strawberry filling and everything, because there are so many people. You know, it's also about voting being our primary right and responsibility, and people with disabilities shouldn't be shut out from that right or responsibility. So there's, you know, some very basic things that we need to be thinking about. How are we communicating our voter education materials? How does someone who is blind receive those voter education materials compared to someone who is sighted, compared to someone who is deaf, or someone who has a combination of different disabilities? We also have to make sure that people have the ability to get into the polling place, having that path of travel. If they can't get into the polling place but they can get there, there's things like curbside voting, which is a bit antiquated and relied on a little bit too much in some other places. And then you have the accessible voting machine, which is sort of the universal machine that makes voting accessible, private, and independent for many different types of people with different types of disabilities. And you know, that's been an incredible barrier for us here in California. We've seen those machines aren't maintained as well. They go down. There have been some lawsuits in Alameda County, but especially in the last election, LA County, Orange County, and especially for people who are blind or low vision, who really rely on those machines. And then the other thing that you have to remember is that we're not really talking about a small segment of the population. People with disabilities make up about 20% of the population, which means that somewhere around 4.75 million Californians could be eligible to vote, are eligible voters with disabilities. But also, as we're all living longer with medical science, we are aging our way into disability in greater numbers. So, you know, the diversity of accessible voting isn't just that we need to print something in a particular language or print something a certain way or have something a certain way. It's a variety and a menu of options that folks can choose from. And the last thing that you mentioned is something that I've been working on quite a bit lately, and that's the vote by mail piece. We hear about it a lot. We hear from a lot of folks a lot of pressure to bring in vote by mail as a process here in California, even some counties wanting to go completely vote by mail. The problem for us and for people with disabilities is that is one option on that menu. So you're narrowing it down. And for a lot of folks, if they can't actually physically fill out that card themselves to mail it in, then it no longer becomes a private, independent, and free vote. The other part of it is we know Washington and Oregon have vote by mail, and I've been working on elections for many years now. I have a lot of colleagues up there, And I hear the anecdotal evidence, I hear the stories up there. They still have to have something that's like a polling place, a station, a physical place where people can bring their cards if they're not put into the mail by their ballots, if they're not put into the mail by the certain date. And those places still have to have the electronic machine as guaranteed under federal and state law for people with disabilities. But those places become fewer and far between. So when you switch a county over to vote by mail, all of a sudden you're in a situation where someone who may have been 10 minutes from their polling place could be an hour and a half away. And so for someone who's on a fixed income, maybe on Social Security, who doesn't have a car, who doesn't drive, who relies on paratransit, that could be an incredible barrier to voting.
So Ted, what is the recipe, the most effective recipe for providing training and access in terms of the poll workers, in terms of the proper machines, as well as vote by mail?
Well, in terms of the poll workers and the processes at the county level, I think it's really having your ear to the ground and listening to the disability community. You know, when we talk about any particular community and how to make a process better for them, we know as good people in America that the best way in a democracy is to listen to that group of people. And so, you know, there are things, the organizations across the state called independent living centers. Those are great places for counties to go to and to interact with. And indeed, many of the counties that are doing a good job on voter accessibility for people with disabilities are interacting with their local independent living center, bringing the ILC and the ILC staff in and community members from the disability community to go and talk to and teach cultural competency and, you know, how to ask for or how to provide reasonable accommodations to poll workers. So that's, you know, one piece is really activating the disability community. And the other piece of it is funding. A lot of our machines that are in polling places across California were based on or were purchased with federal funds that came in when Help America Votes Act was passed. And that funding is now going away. Those machines, by the way, also need a little maintenance right now, and they're not working on some election days. Mm-hmm. So we need a continual stream of funding that comes through to the states and to the counties on a regular basis so that we can provide those pieces of accessibility.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you very much for pointing out that we're all temporarily abled. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
For more information about the League of Women Voters of San Francisco and ways for you to get involved in our important work on voting rights, please visit our website at lwvsf.org. Or to find out more information about this important study on voting rights barriers in California, please go to lccr.com.